The first sound is the tearing. A body stretched past what nature ever intended, and a woman in 1546 fighting to keep her mind from scattering with every nerve that fires. Why is she here, and why are England's most powerful men willing to break the law just to break her? If this truth feels heavy, stay with it. Some histories only make sense in full. The chamber at the White Tower is cold enough to bite. Ropes creak before her bones do, as if the machine itself is impatient. And Askew lies pinned on the rack, wrists thinning against rough fibers, ankles already purple from pressure. The room smells of limestone dust and damp wool, the kind of ordinary details that make the horror sharper, because nothing here announces itself as extraordinary. It is just power at work. Risley and Rich stand nearby, velvet robes marking them as men of order. You expect executioners in a place like this, but instead you get the authors of England's laws, watching her breath shudder as the first rotation pulls her shoulders forward. Somewhere above them a guard shifts quietly, and for a moment the world seems almost still, like a castle settling into sleep. Then the second rotation comes, and the silence snaps open into a scream that scrapes the stone. She gives them nothing. Not a name, not a betrayal, not even a hesitation. The ropes draw tighter and tighter until her arms lengthen beyond natural shape, and still she clings to the one thing they cannot reach. That resistance is what terrifies them. That is why they are here. If this image unsettles you, remember, looking away is exactly what power depends on. But what they do next will drag two of England's highest officers across a line no law was ever meant to cross. She isn't tortured for action. She's tortured for knowledge. And in a kingdom balanced on a dying king's breath, knowledge is the most dangerous weapon of all. What secret could a 25-year-old woman carry that would make England's highest legal officers risk everything to silence her? If this truth feels heavy, stay with it. Some stories collapse if you only hear half. And Askew lies shattered on the rack, but the story that placed her here began far from the torture chamber. It began with whispers inside Whitehall, with men hovering around the throne like insects drawn to a candle they hope will burn just long enough for them to seize its heat. England in 1546 is a kingdom held together by fraying rope. Henry VIII is dying, and everyone knows it. His heir is a sickly child. His court is split between factions that would rather destroy one another than govern a future they cannot control. In this world, a single confession can rearrange the kingdom. A single name spoken aloud can bring down a queen. It is almost absurd, the contrast, while and is stretched past the limits of bone and tendon. Court ladies glide through candlelit halls discussing scripture, poetry, and theological arguments that could get them all killed. These quiet rooms of silk and debate seem harmless, almost gentle. Yet they are the reason she is bleeding in darkness. Risley and Rich don't need her guilt. They need her words. One name, one slip, one thread they can tug until Queen Catherine Parr is dragged into the noose Henry once reserved for wives who displeased him. And knows this. She understands her silence is the only shield the Queen has left. If you believe some truths are worth the discomfort, don't look away yet. Because before her story can reach the throne, it must pass through the rotting, unpredictable mind of the king himself. And his decay is the monster at the center of everything. The smell arrives before the king does. Sweet, rotten, metallic, a human body decaying while still alive. In 1546, nothing matters more than who will command this dying giant's final breath. And every person in England knows that when Henry VIII finally falls, the entire kingdom may fall with him. Henry sits in the great hall at Whitehall Palace, enormous and immovable, like a collapsing monument no one dares admit is broken. His face is swollen, blotched with ruptured vessels. His leg, the infamous ulcer, leaks a pint of pus each day, a fact the courtiers pretend not to smell even as they press scented cloths to their noses. There is something almost mundane about their routine revulsion. as if foulness has become just another part of government procedure. The king's moods swing like an axe on a fraying rope. He laughs with a minister, then 5 minutes later he is cursing a servant for imagined disrespect. But beneath the rage and the decay, his mind is still sharp enough to see the storm circling his throne. His heir, Edward, is brilliant but fragile. A 9-year-old boy cannot rule a nation soaked in religious conflict, which means whoever controls Edward controls England. This is the true battlefield, not torture chambers, but a dying king's chamber, where power is traded in whispers and survival depends on choosing the right side before Henry exhales for the last time. And in this chaos, a woman on a rack is not a coincidence. She is a lever, a threat, a potential weapon. If this image of a kingdom hanging on a corpse unsettles you, stay with it. Power has always worn the smell of rot more easily than the scent of justice. Because two factions are already circling Henry's throne, and whichever one wins will decide an Askew's fate long before the flames ever touch her. Two factions circle the throne like vultures, each one waiting for Henry's final heartbeat, each one convinced that England's future belongs to them alone. In a world this divided, the wrong conversation, the wrong book, even the wrong prayer could end with a woman chained to a stake. Most people looked away. That's how power survived. Power has never needed much to justify cruelty. On one side stands the old guard, Bishop Stephen Gardiner and the Duke of Norfolk, men carved from centuries of Catholic authority. To them, the Protestant Reformation is a disease, something to be burned out of England with the same efficiency they apply to heretics. Their enforcer, Sir Richard Rich, moves through court like a smiling blade. Everyone knows what his testimony can do. Across from them stand the reformers, smaller in number, but bold enough to believe the kingdom can be reshaped. Edward Seymour, Thomas Cranmer, and a handful of others hoping to push England further from Rome. They don't have the old guard's numbers or their claws. What they have is something far more dangerous, the sympathy of the Queen. Here, the story gains a strange softness, a contrast to the stone and agony of the Tower. Queen Catherine Parr's private chambers are filled with books, sermons, whispered debates by firelight. Women gather there not as conspirators, but as thinkers. It should feel harmless. It doesn't. Because in Henry's England, a queen's curiosity is not a virtue. It is a threat. Catherine's secret Protestant beliefs are tinder waiting for a spark, and Gardiner intends to strike the match. All he needs is evidence. A confession, a name spoken under pressure, and an Askew, with her sharp mind and her connections to the Queen's circle, looks like the perfect place to begin pulling the thread. Because the moment Anne steps into this battlefield of faith and politics, her life stops belonging to her and starts belonging to the factions fighting over England's soul. An Askew's story doesn't begin with rebellion. It begins with expectation, the quiet, suffocating kind handed to every Tudor girl at birth. But Anne had a flaw in the system's eyes. She could think, and worse, she could read. What happens when a mind sharper than the world refuses to stay silent? If this question unsettles you, stay with it. Some defiance is born long before the punishment. She grows up in Lincolnshire, a minor noble's daughter meant to follow a simple script: marry well, bear sons, vanish politely into obedience. But by 12 she has already devoured scripture. By 15 she can quote Greek passages that most priests stumble through. There is a small tenderness to this image, a girl reading by candlelight, turning pages she shouldn't understand. But even that calm carries danger. Knowledge is rarely harmless in kingdoms built on fear. Her family tries the usual solution: marriage. Her older sister is promised to Thomas Kyme, a wealthy Catholic landowner. Then the sister dies, and is forced to take her place. Substitute marriage, they call it. A phrase so neat it almost hides the violence underneath. Kyme expects a docile wife. Instead, he gets Anne, who refuses communion, argues with priests, and quotes scripture at dinner until the room grows painfully still. There is a bitter humor to the moment he finally throws her out, servants carrying her to the road like unwanted furniture. Any other Tudor woman would have begged to return, but and simply rises, dusts herself off, and begins walking. 120 miles to London, alone, with nothing but conviction and a mind no one has managed to cage. Her arrival in the city sends whispers through Protestant circles. A young woman, brilliant, fearless, debating doctrine like a scholar. It should have made her celebrated. Instead, it makes her visible, and visibility in Henry's England is its own kind of death sentence. If you believe some truths are worth discomfort, don't turn away. Because what happens next turns a bold young scholar into a target, and eventually into the one person powerful enough to threaten a queen without ever raising her voice. They thought she would break in a day. A woman with no title, no protection, no army behind her. But the first arrest proved something England wasn't ready to confront, and Askew's mind was a fortress none of them could breach. And if this truth feels heavy, stay with it. Some resistance is quiet enough to terrify an empire. The year is 1545 when she is first pulled into Bishop Edmund Bonner's custody. Bloody Bonner. They call him the man who has sent dozens to the flames without losing a night's sleep. The Guildhall interrogation chamber feels almost civil compared to the rack, its wooden benches and stone floor giving the illusion of order. It is a dangerous contrast. Rooms like this make cruelty look administrative. Bonner begins with his favorite tactic, theological traps. Questions designed to corner, to confuse, to push a suspect into saying something damning. And meets each one with scripture, not in English, but in Greek. She quotes Paul, answers with precision, bends the conversation back toward truth every time he tries to twist it. There's a small irony in watching one of England's most feared inquisitors outmaneuvered by a woman half his age. Even the scribes pause, quills hovering, as if realizing the balance of power in the room has shifted. For 5 days Bonner circles her with questions, tightening his net. And yet she slips through every opening, never contradicting doctrine outright, never giving him the single sentence he needs to condemn her. She walks the line so carefully it feels like watching someone dance on a blade. Her cousin eventually secures her release. A moment of relief, the kind that lets the audience breathe for a heartbeat. But the contrast comes quickly. Instead of lying low, she returns to preaching. Her voice, her intellect, her presence, all of it radiates into London's Protestant community with more force than before. She refuses to disappear. Because this first arrest doesn't silence her. It marks her. And the next time England's enforcers come, they arrive with men far more powerful and with intentions far more violent than anything Bonner ever imagined. The second arrest isn't a warning. It's a verdict. By June 1546, the men hunting and are done with subtlety, done with traps, done pretending they only want the truth. They want names. They want a thread that leads straight to Queen Catherine Parr. And an Askew is the one person standing between them and a royal execution. If this truth feels heavy, stay with it. Power grows most brutal when it begins to fear. She is taken to the Guildhall again, but the room feels different this time. Not because of the stone or the benches, those are the same. What changes everything is who enters behind her. Sir Thomas Wriothesley, Lord Chancellor, the highest legal officer in England. And beside him, Sir Richard Rich, the architect of betrayal so legendary, even his name sounds like a threat. Their presence turns the air cold. Wriothesley begins with courtesy, the kind sharpened into a blade. We know you have connections at court. His voice is soft, almost polite, and that contrast makes the moment heavier. And answers with the same calm precision she used on Bonner, but the stakes now are immeasurably higher. When he asks about the Queen's ladies, Suffolk, Hertford, Denny, she denies knowing them at all. The lie is obvious. The danger is clearer. There's a strange stillness in the chamber, as if everyone feels the line she has just drawn. Riotously's composure cracks. His hands tremble. The polished calm of a statesman dissolves into something raw and angry. When he rises from his seat, it is no longer a questioning. It is a decision. You leave us no choice. The words fall like a weight across the room. Even the guards shift uneasily. This isn't the voice of a man enforcing the law. This is someone reaching for violence because he cannot reach for control, and doesn't plead. She doesn't argue. She simply whispers a prayer, a small, steady sound in a room bracing for something monstrous. That quiet moment acts as a breath for the audience, a pause before the descent. Because when they take her to the tower, they take more than her freedom. They take the gloves off. And what happens next is illegal, unprecedented, and brutal enough to stain the legacy of every man involved. The rack waits in silence. 7 feet of wood and iron, built for one purpose, to unmake the human body. On June 19th, 1546, an Askew is brought into the torture chamber knowing exactly what stands before her. But she also knows something the men behind her cannot admit. Once they choose this path, there is no law left to hide behind. If this truth makes you uneasy, stay with it. Power reveals itself most clearly when it stops pretending. The chamber is colder than the corridors outside, the kind of cold that settles into bone. Torches sputter against damp walls. Sir Anthony Neville stands at his post, tense but silent. Thomas, the professional torturer, checks the ropes with the detached routine of a man who has done this too many times. And then Riotously and Rich enter. Velvet robes, polished expressions, the image of English authority. It would almost look ceremonial if you didn't know what they came to take. They strip and down to a thin shift, standard procedure, but the detail feels obscene in its normalcy. Riotously asks again for names. She offers none. When she looks upward, lips moving, it is prayer or focus or both. A small flicker of humanity in a room engineered to crush it. Thomas begins turning the wheel. At first, it only tightens her limbs. Then the strain sharpens. The ropes draw taut. Her shoulders lift, then pull forward, joints pushed past their limits. Her scream rises like something torn from another world, raw enough that even the guards outside shift uncomfortably. It's a contrast that lands hard. Men trained for violence flinching while the kingdom's highest officers stand still. Riotously repeats the question. Names. Another quarter turn. The sound that follows is not human, a wet, grating pop as her shoulders dislocate. Neville steps forward, voice cracking. Stop. This is illegal. His defiance is a brief breath in the suffocating air, a flicker of conscience against the machinery of power. But Riotously doesn't back down. Instead, in a moment so surreal the room itself seems to recoil, he removes his velvet robe. Rich follows. 2 men who dine with kings, who write England's laws, now roll up their silk sleeves like laborers at a dock. They each take a handle, and they turn. It is unprecedented. It is unlawful, and it is devastating. And passes out. They revive her. She passes out again. They drag her back. Hours twist around her body until she is nearly destroyed, whispering only, "I know nothing. Don't look away." Because even after her body breaks, her silence doesn't, and that defiance is what forces one man to run to the king himself, shattering the illusion that this torture was ever sanctioned. She cannot walk. That is the first thing the crowd sees on July 16th, 1546, a young woman so broken by the rack that gravity itself has become her enemy. And yet every person gathered at Smithfield understands one thing. Even in this ruined state, an Askew is still dangerous to the men who put her here. If this truth feels heavy, stay with it. Power always fears the people it fails to silence. Smithfield is a wide, muddy field outside the city walls. The smell of old ash clings to the air, mixed with the metallic tang of fresh timber. Crowds gather early, the same way they gather for tournaments or markets. There is something ordinary about it, a detail that lands like a quiet moral wound. Public death has become just another form of spectacle. When Anne arrives, the mood shifts. Guards carry her in a chair, careful only because careless movement might tear what remains unbroken. A murmur goes through the crowd. Condemned prisoners are meant to walk to the stake. It is part of the ritual. Her inability to stand is not a sign of guilt. It is a confession of what has already been done to her. They chain her upright, metal wrapped around her waist so she doesn't collapse forward. The contrast is almost unbearable. A woman held in place not to prevent escape, but to give the execution its proper shape. Nearby, riotously stands with folded hands. The man who broke her body now observing the ceremony with a statesman's stillness. It is a calm so cold it becomes its own form of violence. Then comes the final cruelty dressed as mercy. A priest steps forward with a parchment bearing the king's seal. A royal pardon. All she must do is renounce her beliefs. The crowd leans in. Even the executioners hesitate. There is a brief, human moment, a collective breath, where it almost feels possible she might take it. She doesn't. I came not hither to deny my Lord and Master. The words cut through the morning air, startling in their simplicity. The priest pleads, and does not look at the paper again. The kindling is lit. Flames crawl upward. Smoke coils thick around her, stealing each breath a little faster than the last. They have tied a small bag of gunpowder to her body, a strange mercy meant to end things quickly. But even this gesture cannot soften what the crowd is witnessing. She stays silent as long as her lungs allow. And when the fire finally forces a cry from her throat, it is brief, swallowed by smoke, and then gone. Hold this moment. Because her body may fall to ash here, but the words she wrote, the truth she carved into the walls of England, are already slipping beyond the reach of every man who tried to erase her. Here is the final irony. Everything they did to silence her only made her louder. By the time an Askew's body turned to ash at Smithfield, her words were already outside the tower, already multiplying, already becoming something no torture chamber could contain. If this truth feels heavy, stay with it. Some voices grow stronger only after the people who feared them are certain they have been destroyed. In the weeks before her execution, Anne wrote secretly on scraps of smuggled paper, each sentence carved through pain sharp enough to make holding a quill unbearable. Guards sympathetic to her cause passed these pages hand to hand, and soon her account reached printers across Protestant Europe. There is something almost gentle in the image of those pages traveling through the night, carried by ordinary people who believed the truth deserved witnesses. But that quiet resistance becomes a storm. Her words ignite England. Woodcut artists depict her torture. Poets shape her defiance into ballads sung far from the courts that condemned her. Preachers cite her as living proof that tyranny can fracture even the mightiest church. While the men who tortured her return to their routines, their reputations quietly rotting, her name becomes a banner. Queen Catherine Parr survives because Anne kept her silence. Gardiner's conspiracy collapses without evidence. Henry dies months later with Catherine at his side, unaware that the very woman his ministers tried to destroy helped save his final queen. It is a strange contrast. The machinery of power grinding on, while one broken woman shifts the course of a kingdom simply by refusing to surrender what she believed. And her legacy deepens. In a world where women could not preach, she preached. Where women could not refuse marriage, she refused. Where women had no legal voice, she left testimony sharp enough to cut through centuries. Her torturers are remembered as monsters, their names synonymous with betrayal and cruelty. But becomes something else entirely, a symbol of the human will, the idea that even the most fragile body can house a spirit stronger than an empire. If you believe some truths must never be buried, remember this. Because each time her story is told, she wins again. Each time her words are read, she rises again. And each time her courage is spoken aloud, she proves that power is always more fragile than the people it tries to silence.